He's known as the voice of God, the man whose mere presence turns ordinary words into straight-up truth. For decades, Morgan Freeman has narrated our dreams, guided our stories, and embodied wisdom on screen. But behind that unshakable voice lies a truth Hollywood never told you. A man who waited 50 years, 5 whole decades of brutal rejection before getting his first Oscar nomination, who survived extreme poverty in segregated Mississippi where black children were taught their lives were worth less, who worked as a janitor, taxi driver, and fair dancer while younger actors with a tenth of his talent became stars. And when success finally showed up, when the world learned his name, the price of that glory hit hard and proved devastating. A catastrophic accident at 71 that destroyed his left hand forever. Chronic pain that haunts him every single second of every day. Public accusations that stained an image built over 8 decades. And a tragedy so brutal, 16 stab wounds, blood on the sidewalk, a granddaughter ripped from music, life that not even his legendary voice can narrate without breaking. How did an invisible boy from the Deep South become the voice that defines a generation? Why did it take half a century for the world to recognize what was always there? And what was the real cost of fame that arrived too late to stop the tragedies still to come? Before we begin, if Morgan Freeman's work has ever moved you, inspired you, or simply made you believe in the power of storytelling, leave a like in tribute to a man who gave his entire life to the craft. Morgan Freeman was born on June 1st, 1937 in Memphis, Tennessee. But his story really begins in the cotton fields and dusty backroads of Mississippi. The Deep South in the late 1930s wasn't just segregated. It was a battlefield. Jim Crow laws ruled with iron fists. Black children entered through back doors, drank from separate fountains, and learned early that their lives were seen as worth less than others. Morgan's father, Morgan Porterfield Freeman, Sr., was a barber trying to survive in an economy built to crush black ambition. His mother, May Edna, worked as a teacher and cleaner, taking any job that would put food on the table. But even 2 incomes weren't enough. When Morgan was still an infant, his parents made the agonizing decision that countless families, music, faced during the Great Depression. They sent him away. He was raised mainly by his paternal grandmother in Charleston, Mississippi, a tiny town where poverty wasn't just a condition. It was the air everyone breathed. Music. His grandmother's house had no electricity, no running water, no luxuries of any kind. Years later, Morgan would recall with brutal honesty, "We were so poor. We didn't even know we were poor. Everyone around us lived the same way." Childhood in Charleston meant picking cotton under a merciless sun for pennies a day. It meant wearing clothes stitched from flour sacks. It meant watching white children ride buses to well-funded schools while black children walked miles to crumbling one-room buildings with outdated books and overworked teachers. Morgan learned to read in those classrooms. But he also learned something darker, that the world had already decided his worth before he even had a shot to prove it. Racism wasn't abstract. It was the shopkeeper who refused to look him in the eye, the police officer who stopped him for walking on the wrong side of the street, the constant, suffocating feeling that one wrong word, one wrong move could end in violence. You learn to keep your head down, Morgan later admitted. You learn to survive by becoming invisible. But even in that invisibility, something was waking up. At age 9, Morgan discovered acting almost by accident. In a school play, he was cast as the lead. And the moment he stepped onto that makeshift stage, something just clicked. For the first time in his young life, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't poor. He wasn't just another black child the world would ignore. He was seen. He was heard. And he felt powerful. The applause was small, the audience just parents and teachers. But for Morgan, it was a huge revelation. "I fell in love with acting that day," he would say decades later. "Not because of the attention, but because for the first time, I felt like I mattered." Still, dreams don't fill empty stomachs. His family moved constantly, chasing work from Mississippi to Chicago to Indiana and back again. Stability was a luxury they couldn't afford. Morgan attended multiple schools, always the new kid, always the outsider. At Broad Street High School in Greenwood, Mississippi, he joined the drama club, throwing himself into every role he could get. While other boys played football or worked after school, Morgan memorized lines, studied characters, and imagined a life beyond cotton fields and segregation. His teachers noticed. One in particular, a drama instructor whose name Morgan carried with gratitude for the rest of his life, told him something that changed everything. "You have a gift. Don't waste it." It was the first time anyone had told him he was capable of something beyond just surviving. But gifts don't pay bills. When Morgan graduated high school in 1955, Hollywood felt as far away as the moon. Black actors in the 1950s were pushed into roles as servants, slaves, and stereotypes. Sidney Poitier was only just beginning to crack the door open. For a kid from Mississippi with no money, no connections, and no clear path, becoming an actor seemed crazy. So Morgan did what millions of young men did in that era. He joined the United States Air Force, not out of patriotism, but out of necessity. It was a paycheck. It was escape. And it was, he hoped, a stepping stone to something better. He trained as a radar technician, served his country, and hated every single day of it. "I thought the Air Force would give me discipline, direction," he later confessed. "Instead, it showed me what I didn't want to be." He realized with painful clarity that following orders, living inside someone else's structure, suffocated him. Acting was the only thing that had ever felt like freedom, and if he didn't chase it now, he never would. In 1959, at 22 years old, Morgan Freeman left the Air Force and moved to Los Angeles with nothing but a duffel bag, a few dollars, and a dream everyone said was impossible. He had survived Mississippi. He had survived the military. Now came the hardest battle of all, surviving Hollywood. Los Angeles in 1959 should have been a dream. Palm trees, ocean breeze, the golden promise of Hollywood just over the hill. But for Morgan Freeman, a 22-year-old black man with a southern accent and zero connections, LA was a cold wake-up call. Auditions led nowhere. Casting directors took one look and offered him the same tired roles. Bellhop, janitor, criminal. Parts that didn't need a name, just a face in the background. He lasted less than 2 years before the rejection wore him down. If Hollywood wouldn't give him a shot, maybe the stage would. In 1960, Morgan packed his life into a single suitcase and moved to New York City, chasing the one place where black actors had even a tiny chance: theater. New York was brutal in a whole different way. Rent devoured his savings. Auditions were ruthless. Hundreds of actors fighting for one role. And once again, the parts available to him were humiliating. Servants, slaves, nameless extras. Morgan later admitted, "I spent years being invisible on stage, just like I was invisible back in Mississippi. Only now I was invisible by choice, and that hit even harder." To survive, he took any job he could find. He danced in the chorus of the 1964 World's Fair. He worked as a transcript clerk at Los Angeles City College, filing papers and answering phones. He drove a taxi through Manhattan's chaotic streets, picking up fares while mentally rehearsing monologues in traffic. Every dollar went toward rent, food, and the small hope that the next audition would finally be different. But the next audition was never different. Years passed. Morgan turned 25, then 28, then 30. Friends from acting classes quit and went back home. Others got stable jobs and gave up the dream. Morgan kept grinding, but the weight of failure was heavy. He married Jeanette Adair Bradshaw in 1967, and together they raised 4 children, his stepdaughter from Jeanette's previous relationship and 3 others. Suddenly acting wasn't just a dream anymore. It felt irresponsible. He had mouths to feed, bills stacking up, and a career that only existed in his imagination. The theater community knew his face. Directors respected his work, but respect doesn't pay rent. He jumped between off-Broadway shows, regional theater, and small experimental productions that paid almost nothing. In 1967, he finally caught a break, a role in an all-black production of Hello, Dolly, on Broadway starring Pearl Bailey. It wasn't the lead, but it was Broadway. It was legit. It was proof he could survive in this world. The show ran for years, and Morgan performed night after night, sharpening his craft in front of live audiences who barely noticed him. But he was learning. Watching Pearl Bailey command the stage taught him timing, presence, and the power of stillness. "She didn't need to shout to be heard," Morgan recalled. "That's when I learned that sometimes the quietest voice is the loudest." Still, the 1970s arrived, and Morgan was pushing 35 with little to show for 15 years of struggle. His marriage was strained. His children needed stability he couldn't give, and the industry still saw him as replaceable. He auditioned for film roles and was told his face was too intense, his voice too deep, his presence too serious. Hollywood wanted black comedians, not black Shakespearean actors. Depression slowly crept in. There were nights Morgan sat in his tiny apartment wondering if he had messed up big time, if he should have stayed in the Air Force, taken a safe job, lived a normal life. "I questioned everything," he later confessed. "I thought maybe I was chasing something that was never meant for me." Then in 1971 came a lifeline, The Electric Company, a children's educational show on PBS. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't film. But it was steady music, work, a paycheck, and national exposure. Morgan played Easy Reader, a cool character who made reading feel dope for kids. For 5 years, he showed up, performed, and slowly built a fan base of children who had no idea their favorite TV character was a frustrated Shakespearean actor barely paying the bills. But even that felt like a trap. He was 40 years old, loved by kindergartners, invisible to Hollywood. The dream he'd chased since age 9 felt further away than ever. The lost decade had turned into 2 lost decades, and time, Morgan knew, was running out. By the early 1980s, Morgan Freeman had accepted a painful truth. He was never going to be a movie star. At 45, he was too old for leading roles, too unknown for major parts, and way too proud to keep playing stereotypes. But he refused to quit, no matter what. If Hollywood wouldn't come to him, he'd prove himself where they couldn't ignore him, on stage. In 1978, he joined the Shakespearean theater circuit, performing in productions of Coriolanus and Titus Andronicus. Critics started noticing. Here was an actor with gravity, with depth, with a presence that commanded attention even in silence. In 1980, he originated the role of Hulk Hoburn in Alfred Urry's Off-Broadway. Music, play Driving Miss Daisy, a gentle chauffeur navigating racial tensions in the Jim Crow South. The role was small, the production modest, but Morgan's performance? Man, it was unforgettable. Theater critics raved, awards followed, and slowly Hollywood started paying attention. Not with blockbuster offers, but with character roles, the kind reserved for actors who could elevate any scene just by being in it. In 1987, at age 50, Morgan was cast in Street Smart as Fast Black, a violent pimp opposite Christopher Reeve. It was a small film, barely seen by audiences, but Morgan's performance was volcanic, dangerous, unpredictable, terrifying. When the Oscar nominations were announced in 1988, Morgan Freeman's name appeared for the first time. Best Supporting Actor. At 50 years old, after 3 decades of invisibility, he was finally seen. He didn't win. The statue went to Sean Connery for The Untouchables. But the nomination changed everything. Suddenly, casting directors who once dismissed him were calling. Scripts arrived. Offers multiplied. Then came 1989, the year Morgan Freeman became undeniable. First, Driving Miss Daisy was adapted into a film with Jessica Tandy, reprising her stage role, and Morgan returning as Hope. The movie became a cultural phenomenon, a quiet meditation on race, dignity, and friendship that resonated across America. Morgan's performance was the soul of the film, understated, powerful, heartbreaking. He earned his 2nd Oscar nomination, this time for Best Actor. That same year, he appeared in Glory alongside Denzel Washington and Matthew Brick, playing Sergeant Major John Rollins in the story of the 1st African-American Regiment in the Civil War. It was another supporting role, but Morgan made it unforgettable, lending gravitas and humanity to every scene. 2 Oscar nominations in 2 years. At 52, Morgan Freeman wasn't just working. He was thriving. But the timing stung. "I spent 30 years preparing for success that came when most actors retire," he admitted years later. "Part of me was grateful. Another part was angry it took so long." Hollywood loves a late bloomer story, but it rarely acknowledges the cost. Morgan had spent his prime years scraping by, raising children in uncertainty, watching younger actors leap past him. Now he was being celebrated, but the bitterness of lost time lingered. His marriage to Jeanette had crumbled under the weight of financial stress and his obsessive pursuit of acting. They divorced in 1979 after 12 years together. By the time fame arrived, he was alone. Still, he didn't slow down. He couldn't. This was the moment he'd waited for since age 9 in that Mississippi schoolhouse. In 1990, he married M.N.A. Key Lee, a costume designer, hoping this time success would allow him to balance career and love. And the roles kept coming. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Unforgiven, The Shawshank Redemption. Morgan Freeman, the man Hollywood ignored for decades, had become one of the most sought-after actors in the world. But even as the accolades piled up, even as his voice became synonymous with authority and wisdom, a quiet dread followed him. He had spent 50 years learning that success is fragile, and he was right to be afraid, because the hardest blows were still ahead. The 1990s belonged to Morgan Freeman, not in the explosive way stardom claims young actors, but in the quiet, undeniable way gravity, music, pulls everything into orbit. At an age when most actors fade into character roles and nostalgia circuits, Morgan was just beginning to define what screen presence truly meant. In 1994, The Shawshank Redemption was released to modest box office numbers and lukewarm critical reception. It was considered a noble failure, a well-made prison drama that audiences simply didn't show up for. But Morgan's performance as Ellis Red Reading, the institutionalized inmate who narrates Andy Dufresne's journey, carried a weight that transcended the film's initial reception. His voice, measured, weary, hopeful, became the soul of the story. Years later, as Shawshank found new life on cable television and home video, it transformed into a cultural phenomenon. Consistently ranked as one of the greatest films ever made, it became inseparable from Morgan's narration. That opening line, "I guess it comes down to a simple choice really. Music, get busy living or get busy dying," wasn't just dialogue. It was scripture. Morgan had become the voice people trusted to tell them the truth. Hollywood noticed. In 1995, he starred in Seven opposite Brad Pitt, playing music, Detective Somerset, a weary veteran counting down to retirement in a world drowning in depravity. The role could have been forgettable. Cynical cop, seen it before, but Morgan infused it with dignity, exhaustion, and a flicker of hope. Music that made the film's darkness bearable. Seven became a box office hit and a thriller classic, cementing Morgan as the industry's conscience. Then came Amistad in 1997, where he played Theodore Jodson opposite Anthony Hopkins in Steven Spielberg's historical drama about the 1839 slave hip rebellion. Morgan brought quiet fury to a role that could have been reduced to noble suffering, reminding audiences that dignity and rage can coexist in the same breath. But it was 2004 that brought Morgan Freeman the recognition he'd chased for over 40 years. In Million Dollar Baby, Clint Eastwood's devastating boxing drama, Morgan played Eddie Scrapiron Dri, a former boxer turned gym custodian who narrates the tragic story of Maggie Fitzgerald. Once again, his voice guided the audience through heartbreak. Once again, he made the unbearable beautiful. When the 2005 Academy Awards arrived, Morgan Freeman's name was called Best Supporting Actor. At 67 years old, after 4 nominations over 17 years, he finally held the Oscar in his hands. His acceptance speech was brief, humble, almost uncomfortable with the attention. "I want to thank everybody and anybody who ever had anything to do with the making of this picture," he said simply, his voice cracking just slightly. No grand declarations, no speeches about perseverance, just gratitude. But those who knew his story understood what that statue represented. Vindication. Proof that the boy from Mississippi, the invisible soldier, the struggling theater actor, the man told he'd never make it, had not only made it, but become irreplaceable. The roles grew larger, the paychecks astronomical. Batman Begins and The Dark Knight cast him as Lucius Fox, bringing gravitas to superhero spectacle. Invictus reunited him with Eastwood, playing Nelson Mandela with such authenticity that South Africans wept. Documentaries sought him as narrator. March of the Penguins. Through the Wormhole. Because his voice didn't just describe events, it gave them meaning. He became the actor directors called when they needed someone the audience would believe without question. Playing God in Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty wasn't typecasting. It was acknowledgement. If anyone could make divinity feel real, it was Morgan Freeman. By the late 2000s, music. His net worth soared past $250 million. He owned multiple properties, including a 124-acre ranch in Mississippi. Returning to the state that once tried to erase him, now as a landowner, a success story, a legend. He flew his own plane, indulged in hobbies denied to him during decades of poverty, and worked only on projects that interested him. But wealth couldn't insulate him from what came next. In 2008, at the peak of his powers, fate delivered a blow so violent it would alter the rest of his life. And unlike the scripts he performed, this suffering had no narrator to make sense music of it. Only pain, silence, and a body that would never be whole again. August 3, 2008. A summer night in Tallahassee County, Mississippi. The same state where Morgan had picked cotton as a child. The same back roads where he'd once walked invisible. Now at 71, he was returning as a legend, flying his private plane to his ranch, living the life poverty once made unimaginable. He was driving his 1997 Nissan Maxima along Highway 32, with Dearest Meyer, a close friend and business partner, in the passenger seat. The highway was dark, the kind of rural two-lane road where streetlights are rare and wildlife appears without warning. What happened next remains unclear. Some reports suggest he swerved to avoid an animal. Others point to a blown tire. Still others whisper he may have fallen asleep at the wheel. What is certain is this: the car veered off the road, flipped multiple times, and crumpled like paper. When rescuers arrived, they found Morgan trapped inside the wreckage, unconscious and broken. The jaws of life had to cut through twisted metal to extract him. Dearest was injured, but stable. Morgan was dying. His left shoulder was shattered. His left arm hung useless. His hand, the one that had held an Oscar, signed autographs, and gestured through 1,000 performances, was crushed beyond recognition. He was airlifted to Regional Medical Center in Memphis, the same city where he'd been born 71 years earlier. Surgeons worked through the night. His shoulder required extensive reconstruction. Nerves in his arm were severed. His hand, they told him bluntly, would never fully function again. The technical term was nerve damage. The reality was simpler. His left hand was paralyzed. For weeks, Morgan lay in a hospital bed, drifting in and out of morphine-induced fog. The pain was relentless, a fire that medication could dull but never extinguish. Worse than the physical agony was the psychological realization creeping in with every dawn. This would not heal. This was permanent. At 71, his body had been irrevocably altered. When he was finally released, the world saw photographs of Morgan Freeman wearing a compression glove on his left hand, the kind used to manage nerve pain and reduce swelling. In interviews, he spoke carefully about the accident, downplaying the severity. "It's a nuisance more than anything. Music," he told reporters, forcing a smile. But those close to him saw the truth. The man who had spent his life mastering physical expression now struggled to button a shirt, grip a pen, or perform the smallest tasks without assistance. The nerve damage set off fibromyalgia, a chronic pain condition that drenches the body in stabbing, burning sensations with no cure. Some days were manageable. Other days, the pain hit so hard Morgan could barely stand. "It's a never-ending ache," he admitted years later. "It follows me everywhere, every moment of every day." The compression glove became permanent, a visible mark of fragility on a man the world saw as invincible. Paparazzi snapped it nonstop. Tabloids speculated, fans worried, and Morgan, always private, pulled back even more from the public eye, showing up only when contractually obligated, flashing a smile for the cameras while his left hand throbbed under the fabric. But the physical damage wasn't the only scar. The accident sparked uncomfortable questions. Why was Dearest Meyer in the car? Morgan was still married to Na-Ki Lee at the time, even though their relationship had grown distant. Rumors swirled that Dearest was more than a friend. Whispers Morgan flat out refused to address. The crash, meant to be a private tragedy, turned into straight-up public gossip fodder. The irony was brutal. Morgan had spent decades invisible in Mississippi, overlooked and dismissed. Now he came back as a broken man, his suffering picked apart by strangers. The state that once ignored him now watched him bleed. Recovery was slow and incomplete. Physical therapy brought back some mobility, but the left hand stayed mostly useless. Simple pleasures, playing guitar, holding a grandchild tight, even shaking hands with confidence, were gone. Acting, his life's work, got tougher. Directors, music, had to shoot around the glove. Scripts were tweaked. Scenes needing two working hands were rewritten or cut. And still, Morgan kept grinding, not because he needed the cash, but because stopping meant giving up. In 2009, Just months after the crash, he showed up in Invictus, playing Nelson Mandela, a man who endured 27 years in prison and walked out unbroken. The parallels weren't lost on Morgan. Mandela taught me something. He said, "Pain is temporary. Dignity is forever." But dignity doesn't erase pain. It just helps you carry it. And Morgan Freeman would carry the scars of that Mississippi highway for the rest of his life. A reminder that even legends are fragile, that fate doesn't care about fame, and that some wounds never really heal. For decades, Morgan Freeman's image was untouchable. The voice of God, the embodiment of wisdom, the elder statesman of Hollywood whose mere presence leveled up any project. His reputation wasn't just clean, it was sacred. And then in May 2018, it blew up in a single afternoon. CNN published an investigation titled "Morgan Freeman Accused of Sexual Harassment by 8 Women." The story was detailed, damning, and impossible to brush off. 8 women, production assistants, junior staffers, colleagues stepped forward with allegations stretching across decades. They described a pattern of unwanted touching, inappropriate comments about their bodies, and a workplace where Morgan's behavior made them feel objectified and powerless. One woman, a production assistant on Going in Style, alleged that Morgan repeatedly tried to lift her skirt and asked if she was wearing underwear. Another recalled working at his film company, Revelations Entertainment, where she claimed he would stare at her body and make comments that left her feeling violated. A senior production staff member described his behavior as a pattern of inappropriate advances everybody knew about, but nobody stopped. The allegations weren't one-offs. They painted a picture of a man who used power and status to make women uncomfortable, who treated junior staff like objects for his own amusement, who moved like his legend made him untouchable. The report included 16 total witnesses who either experienced or saw the behavior firsthand. The response was immediate and devastating. Within hours, the #MeToo movement, which had already taken down Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, and plenty of others, locked in on Morgan Freeman. Visa Incorporated, which had just launched a campaign with Morgan as its spokesperson, yanked the ads. Screen Actors Guild announced it would reconsider his Lifetime Achievement Award nomination. Projects were quietly shelved. Co-stars kept their distance. Morgan dropped a statement that same day. "Anyone who knows me or has worked with me knows I am not someone who would intentionally offend or knowingly make anyone feel uneasy. I apologize to anyone who felt uncomfortable or disrespected. That was never my intent." But the apology felt hollow. Critics said he admitted to making people uncomfortable without actually denying the behavior. He expressed regret for their feelings, not for his actions. It felt like one of those PR non-apologies celebs roll out when they're cornered, not when they're truly sorry. Days later, he released a second statement, this time more defensive. "I am devastated that 80 years of my life is at risk of being undermined in the blink of an eye by Thursday's media reports." The spotlight shifted from the women to his legacy, from accountability to protecting his own name. The damage ran deeper. The fallout wasn't just about work. It was existential. For a man who built a career playing moral authorities, judges, presidents, mentors, even God, the accusations flipped the script hard. The voice that narrated truth was now accused of hypocrisy. The face of dignity was now tied to misconduct. Some defended him. Colleagues pointed to decades of music, professional conduct, arguing that the allegations, while serious, made up a small slice of his interactions. Others noted none of the claims involved criminal charges, only workplace impropriety. Morgan never faced criminal charges. No lawsuits were filed. The court of public opinion became the only courtroom. But in the Me Too era, public opinion shows no mercy. The cultural moment demanded accountability, not nuance. And Morgan Freeman, whether guilty of deliberate harassment or just oblivious to how he made people feel, became part of the reckoning. The untouchable had been touched. The voice of God was now just human, flawed, and knocked down a few pegs. Work went on, but different. He appeared in Angel Has Fallen and the Hitman's Bodyguard sequel, roles leaning more on action cred than moral gravitas. Narration gigs dried up. Documentary producers who once lined up for his voice found someone else. The industry didn't blacklist him. His talent and box office pull still mattered. But the reverence? Gone. At home, the scandal sped up the collapse of his marriage. Morgan and Na Kali Lee had been separated since 2007, the year before his car crash, but the divorce was finalized in 2010 after 23 years together. Friends later hinted the emotional weight of the accusations, stacked on existing cracks, made reconciliation a no-go. By 2018, Morgan was alone, getting older, watching the legacy he'd built over 8 decades unravel in real time. The cruelest part wasn't even the accusations. It was when they hit. Morgan was 81. He had survived poverty, racism, decades of rejection, a near-fatal accident, and chronic pain. He'd climbed from invisible to iconic. And now, near the end of his life, the image the world had of him, wise, dignified, untouchable, looked shaky at best, fake at worst. He pulled back from the spotlight, popping up only when necessary, talking less, smiling rarely. The man who once narrated the universe now chose silence. And maybe that silence said more than words ever could. If the 2018 allegations bruised Morgan Freeman's reputation, the event that truly shattered him happened 3 years earlier on a quiet New York street in the early hours of August 16, 2015. A tragedy so savage, so senseless that even his legendary composure couldn't tank through it. Adina Hines was 33 years old, vibrant, full of life. She was Morgan's step-granddaughter, the granddaughter of his first wife, Jeanette Adair Bradshaw, whom he had helped raise since she was a child. Morgan had been a father figure to Adina her entire life, backing her acting dreams, paying for her education, staying close even after his divorce from Jeanette ended in 1979. To Morgan, music, she wasn't just family. She was one of the few who knew him before the fame, who loved him not as a legend, but as Grandpa Morgan. That August night, Adina was outside her Washington Heights apartment with music, her boyfriend, Lamar Davenport. Neighbors later said they heard screaming, then saw Davenport on top of Adina, stabbing her again and again in the torso and chest. Witnesses tried to step in, yelling at him to stop. He didn't. He kept going, over and over, even as her life poured onto the pavement. When police arrived, Davenport was still standing over her body, the knife in his hand, rambling about exorcising demons. Adina was rushed to Harlem Hospital Center, but was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. She had been stabbed 16 times. The medical examiner's report was clinical. Multiple stab wounds to the chest, perforation of vital organs, massive blood loss. But no report could capture the horror of those final moments. Morgan was in Mississippi when he got the call. Friends later said he collapsed, physically unable to process what he was hearing. He flew to New York right away, walking into a scene no grandfather should ever see, police tape, crime scene investigators, his granddaughter's blood still marking the sidewalk. The grief wrecked him. Morgan released a statement through his publicist. The world will never know her artistry and talent and how much she had to offer. Her friends and family were fortunate enough to have known what she meant as a person. Her star will continue to shine bright in our hearts, thoughts. His defense tried to play the insanity card, saying he was deep in drug-induced psychosis, that he thought Adina was possessed, and he was straight up performing an exorcism. Prosecutors painted a whole different picture. A track record of volatile behavior, substance abuse, and a relationship drowning in instability. Morgan sat through the trial, quiet in the gallery, forced to relive his granddaughter's final moments through cold forensic testimony and witness accounts. He listened as neighbors described her screams. He looked at crime scene photos that would haunt him forever. And he watched Lamar Davenport show zero remorse, zero acknowledgement of the life he had destroyed. In May 2018, the very same month the CNN allegations surfaced, Davenport was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The jury decided he'd been emotionally disturbed during the killing, which knocked the charge down for murder. For Morgan, the verdict felt like another gut punch. 20 years for 16 stab wounds. 20 years for wiping out a life that had barely even started. But the nightmare didn't stop with the conviction. In one of the cruelest twists imaginable, tabloids started pushing a disgusting rumor, falsely claiming that Morgan and Adina had an inappropriate relationship. The story was built on nothing but whispers and straight-up malicious gossip, a made-up scandal cooked up to sell papers by exploiting grief. Morgan's lawyers fired back with fierce denials. Adina's mother publicly blasted the rumors as vile lies. Still, the damage was done. A man mourning his murdered granddaughter now had to defend himself against accusations that twisted his pain into a weapon. It was tragedy stacked on top of tragedy, proof that even in the darkest moments, the public and the press felt entitled to tear apart his suffering. The murder changed Morgan in ways success and scandal never could. Friends noticed he talked less about the future and more about the past. His ranch in Mississippi, once a getaway, turned into a sanctuary he hardly ever left. Filming became mechanical. He'd show up, deliver his lines with that same gravitas, and vanish. The spark that once lit up his performances, the joy that made even small roles unforgettable, dimmed. In interviews after Adina's death, his answers about family got shorter, more guarded. When asked about his greatest regret, he paused for a long time before quietly saying, "Not being there when it mattered most." It wasn't clear if he meant the night, music, she was killed, or the years leading up to it. But the weight in his voice made it clear he carried both. Adina Hines should have outlived him. She should have had decades to chase her acting career, to find love that didn't end in violence, to grow into the artist she dreamed of becoming. Instead, she became a statistic. One of the 1,800 women killed by intimate partners each year in America, a number so common it barely makes headlines unless the victim is tied to someone famous. For Morgan Freeman, she wasn't a statistic. She was the little girl who once curled up in his lap, the young woman whose dreams he encouraged, the irreplaceable piece of his life ripped away by a violence no fame, no fortune, no clout could stop. And losing her taught him the cruelest lesson of all, that all the Oscars, all the accolades, all the wealth and prestige in the world mean nothing in the face of random tragedy. The car crash in 2008 didn't just shatter Morgan Freeman's left arm and shoulder. It woke up something far more insidious. Fibromyalgia, a chronic condition that turns the body into a battleground where pain is the only thing that never clocks out. For most people, fibromyalgia is invisible, a ghost illness people can't see and sometimes don't even believe. For Morgan, wearing that compression glove on every red carpet, every interview, every public appearance, it was impossible to hide. Fibromyalgia doesn't show up with casts or obvious wounds. It hits from the inside. Widespread pain moving through muscles, joints, and nerves without warning and without mercy. Some mornings, he woke up feeling almost normal. Other days, the pain was so brutal, he couldn't even lift his arm to brush his teeth. "It's the kind of pain that makes you not want to move," he said in a 2012 interview. "But if you don't move, it gets worse." The compression glove became both treatment and symbol. Built to reduce swelling and manage nerve pain, it gripped his hand constantly, a tight reminder with every movement that his own body had betrayed him. Fans noticed it right away. Photographers zoomed in. Interviewers kept asking, and Morgan, always private about vulnerability, stuck to the same steady answer. "It's just something I live with now." But living with it meant changing everything. Scripts packed with physical action were passed up or rewritten. Fight scenes were out of the question. Even simple blocking, shaking hands, opening doors, holding props had to be carefully choreographed to hide his limits. Directors learned to frame shots around the glove, choosing angles that kept his left hand out of view or using CGI to erase it in post-production. The mental toll cut even deeper than the physical one. Morgan had spent 70 years building strength, pushing through poverty, rejection, racism, and failure with sheer grit. Now his own body was the enemy, and no amount of willpower could beat nerve damage. "You can fight a lot of things," he admitted softly. "You can't fight your own body." Sleep became a struggle. Fibromyalgia brings insomnia along for the ride, and chronic pain kept him awake through long Mississippi nights, staring at the ceiling, counting down the hours until dawn so he could fake normal again. Medication helped, but it never fully shut the pain down. Physical therapy kept him mobile, but it couldn't give back what was gone. And every year was a reminder that he was aging inside a body that had already failed once and might fail again. By his mid-80s, Morgan moved slower, spoke softer, and stepped into public view less often. The Mississippi ranch that once symbolized triumph became a refuge where he didn't have to pretend to be strong when he wasn't feeling it. Friends visited less. Projects were chosen not for artistic passion, but for what his body could handle. The man whose voice once narrated entire universes now spent most days in quiet, accompanied by pain and the ghosts of what used to be possible. Fibromyalgia didn't just mess with his body. It hijacked his future, the retirement he imagined, the freedom he thought he'd earned, the peace he deserved after 8 decades of grinding. Instead, he was handed a life where every movement had a price tag, and the only question each morning was how high it would be. In 2025, Morgan Freeman is 87 years old. The compression glove is still there. The fibromyalgia hasn't gone anywhere. The left hand that once held an Oscar mostly hangs at his side now. He moves carefully, each step deliberate, trying not to trigger pain that medication can only dull, never erase. His Mississippi ranch, a 124-acre sanctuary, is where he spends most of his time. Away from cameras, red carpets, and the non-stop scrutiny that comes with being a legend, he turned part of the land into a bee sanctuary. 26 hives producing honey. A quiet hobby built on patience and stillness. 2 things age and pain forced him to learn. Bees don't care about Oscars, he said. They just want you to be present. Financially, he's secure. His net worth sits around $250 million, built not just from acting, but from smart investments, real estate, and decades of narration work that still pays residuals. He owns properties across the country, drives when his hand allows, and on good days when the pain eases up, he'll even fly his private plane. But he works less now. The roles he takes are chosen carefully, mostly voice work where physical limits don't matter, and that unmistakable voice can still pull in 6 figures for a few hours in a recording booth. He appeared in A Good Person in 2023, a small indie drama, delivering a performance that reminded audiences why he's one of a kind. Not because of flashy moves, but because of the weight he brings, music, to silence. The way he can fill a scene just by being there. Still, the public sees him differently. The Me Too allegations linger. Adina's murder left a shadow that won't fade. The compression glove is a constant reminder that even legends are fragile. The so-called voice of God is, in the end, just the voice of a mortal man, flawed and finite. And maybe that's the real legacy. Morgan Freeman's story was never about being perfect. It was about persistence. A boy born into segregation who refused to stay invisible. An actor rejected for 30 years who kept showing up anyway. A man shattered by accident and tragedy who kept working. A legend accused and knocked down who kept breathing. He didn't land his first Oscar nomination until 50. Didn't win until 67. Didn't build real wealth until most people are already retired. And now, at 87, he faces what we all do sooner or later. The slow fading from a world that once needed him desperately, music, and now keeps moving without looking back. But the voice lives on in The Shawshank Redemption, playing on screens somewhere every single day. In documentaries narrating mysteries we may never fully understand. In the memories of millions who heard him speak, and, even for a moment, believed that wisdom and dignity still had a place in this world. Morgan Freeman showed us that success can come late and still hit hard. That pain doesn't cancel your purpose. That legends aren't built in one shiny moment, but in decades of refusing to quit. And that even voices we think will echo forever eventually fade, leaving behind only the memory of what they once meant. Share your reflections below. Music. What part of Morgan's journey hits you the hardest? Subscribe for more untold chapters of the legends who shaped our world. And remember, behind every voice we trust, there's a human being who fought, stumbled, and got back up. Not because they were perfect, but because they refused to disappear.